Hello, my name's Jason. I'm not an archaeologist, but I do play one on TV. So come join me as we go into the dust. All right, this is the second interview in my interview series. And once again, I will be speaking with a classmate of mine, showing an example of someone who got involved in archaeology later on in their life and career. Now, unlike my first interview with David Ingram, my second one with Michael Flynn is interviewing someone who's in the grad diploma program, graduate diploma. This is sort of an accelerated program for people who have a bachelor's or a career in something different and want to get into archaeology. Now, like David Ingram, my first interviewee, Michael Flynn, the current interviewee, also sold a business, cashed out, and then went into archaeology. So, for a second career, is it only for people who were able to make a bunch of money and do this as a luxury? Not necessarily. But given the poor state of pay for archaeologists in the UK, which is really paltry, having money definitely helps. Moreover, I'll point out that so far between Michael, David, and I, we're three white guys. But I definitely want to say that that's not necessarily the case. My graduate diploma program for the mature students is very, very diverse. In fact, I think it's majority female, lots of different races and colors involved. And along the way in my archaeology journey, I've met civil servants or former civil servants, former writers, accountants, even a glass blower. And in fact, all of those that I just mentioned in particular were female. I also have to point out that the low pay of archaeologists and the difficulty getting into it without money, well, that's not the same in every country. In the US, for example, archaeologists are much better compensated than in Britain. So it really depends what country you're in. It's also important to remember that even though archaeology to begin with is a niche field, there's so many niches within the archaeological space. There are lab technicians and scientists. There are illustrators and photographers, folks at museums, consultants. So there's a lot of different kinds of jobs you can do, each of which have varying degrees of physical exertion and different levels of pay. We discuss some of the benefits of being an archaeology student. People take you seriously. If you go to an archaeology site with your student card, you can get some VIP treatment. Like when Mike went to the Archaeological Museum in Athens and got some behind the scenes access. Or myself, when I went to Lepenski Vir in Serbia, which I covered on my last site visit, I also got a little bit of the VIP treatment. So it does help. We'll also talk about some of the lessons you can actually learn about archaeology, some of what the past teaches us about our future and our present. For example, pandemics, supply chain issues, and how societies in the past dealt with climate change and the challenges around that. So I hope you enjoy this interview. Welcome back. This is the second interview in our interview series, Into the Dust Archaeology. Now, for this first group of interviews, as I mentioned, I want to actually interview some of my colleagues at UCL. Now, there are quite a few mature students. I'm one of them. And again, that's not necessarily a character judgment. It just means I'm older. And a lot of us have quite diverse and interesting backgrounds. So Michael Flynn is someone who in our group where we took a degree called graduate diploma in archaeology. Essentially what that is it gives you sort of a certificate that you can actually then take on to go to grad school in archaeology if you're interested. Normally you'd have to do a whole bachelor's, which I was not up to do at my age. So it draws together quite some interesting characters. And so Michael is still in the degree because he's a part-time. I've moved on to the master's degree. Now, in our group, we have like a chat group. Michael is the one who's always instigating the fun. He's the one who's always the life of the party. We all send each other vacation pics. That's what we were just discussing before. You know, with him, I'm not sure, is that his daughter? Is that his girlfriend? No, he's that kind of guy. A lot of fun. So always up for a drink at the pub. And I thought he'd be a very good interviewee. So without further ado, Michael Flynn.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Michael.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Glad
Happy
to
New
hear
Year.
you're fine and fettled and ready to roll.
Yes, absolutely. So let's hear a little bit about you before UCL days.
Well, it's probably not so little. It's probably quite a lot, actually. um, yeah, well, I mean, if I take you back to my first degree, I did biology and geology at Manchester. That was my interest, and I wanted to get a job in geology. So the obvious route was to find an oil company that would take me in, and I did. Luckily enough, I got ExxonMobil, as they called now, they were Mobil Oil at the time, to give me a job, and I went on a graduate scheme with them. And when I was ready to start working for them, they told me that I wasn't going out on the rigs, I wasn't going to be drilling, I was actually going to be doing sales and marketing, because they felt that that's what my forte was, which shocked me a little bit, because that wasn't what I was expecting. I was sort of ready to drill, be in the labs, and go and hunt oil for them. I didn't last long with them. It wasn't for me. You sort of first job after university, you sort of like dive into whoever gives you a job basically and pays you some money. But it wasn't for me, and I felt that I needed to do something that I really had in my bones and was interested in properly, and I went back to university. And this time I did an MBA at Nottingham, but I focused on football business. Football is my love. I've had other loves, but football is a love which is sort of maintained throughout the years. And luckily, I ended up getting a job with Bass and heading up the Carling Premiership, which is the biggest domestic sponsorship ever. Here in the UK, that is. And actually, having said that, it's a domestic, game, but domestic league, but it's a global platform. So that was really interesting. I did that for a few years. Managed to sort of hand medals to my favourite team, Manchester United, which was great. I was a pig in shit for a while. But, you're doing the same thing over and over again. It wasn't stretching me. There was no challenge. And the internet was booming at that time. So I thought, well, I've got to get into this somehow.
And when were we now? When was this?
So I guess this is sort of circa 1990. Well, I left. Yeah, I joined Bass sort of in the early 90s, and then in 96 I headed up there. I became sponsorship director of the Premier League. So I got in pretty early days in the Premier League, which was great. And it was great fun, but as I said, I had to leave. I had to do something that was sort of going to challenge me and sort of move me forward, and that would have been around about 2000.
Got it.
So in the year 2000, I headed up a business called Fastweb Media, who were doing a lot in digital football, and they're part of a bigger organisation, which was bought out by Microsoft. I ended up buying the business back from Microsoft, and moving it forward and becoming effectively an agency. And we'd work for Manchester United, we worked for the Premier League, we worked for UEFA, as well as other brands like Bravissimo, bras and swimwear for ladies, and also beer. So beer, boobs, and balls. I ended up working on, which is quite good. If I knew that's what I was going to get into at university, I'd have been happy. Anyway, that sort of took me to a few years. I managed to sell that business. I put a lot of money into any money we made. I put it into innovation. So we had our sort of look at an innovation team where we look at eyes. And I created something which allowed you to sort of instigate an advertising, be it sort of a Google ad or a Facebook ad, based on what was on television at that particular time. So someone like, Top Gear, for example, if they had a new Range Rover, it's a BBC, so there's no adverts on it. But we knew a lot of people would be watching it. And so at that specific time that they mentioned Range Rover or whatever the car was, we would start paying PPC ads on Google and Facebook, etc. So, we're hardly using any inventory, but we're using it so timely. So, of course, the effectiveness went through the roof, 600% increase in what wasn't sales. It was actually sort of getting what do you do when you book a car to drive? Test drives. Yes. Test drives went up. So that was really good. And then I ended up selling that business. And I sold it to a business which I didn't really see where they were going. So, luckily for them and for me, we decided that I would go on gardening leave for a year, which was good fun for the first 6 months. The second 6 months was probably, the worst, most boredom I'd ever had.
Not too much gardening going on.
No gardening at all, actually, unless you could argue doing some stuff in the Maldives occasionally.
Okay, yep.
But no, it was the next 6 months wasn't for me. I need to be focused on something. I'm clearly not a good guy to be around when I'm not focused or have something going, as I found out. But I came up with another idea, and that idea was to use data and sport together, because I've always been a bit of a data geek. And I came up with a project, and I called it Data Power. And all systems go, things were looking good. And then, of course, COVID happened.
Yep.
And Data Power was measuring sport. And, of course, when COVID happened...
No sports.
No sport. So what do I do? And a few months I was just paying for something that wasn't nothing was happening. And I needed investment anyway, so I was running short of money. But luckily, I managed to find someone who was interested in investing, to the point where they decided that they wouldn't invest; they would buy my business. So
that brings me right up to the first question, which is: so I think, what was your long-term, or if it happened immediately, what was your interest in archaeology, and what was the moment? So you needed something to do, but what was the moment that you said, I'm going to do this?
Well, I don't do anything by halves anyway. I'll always dive in full. I'm very committed. Once I've decided something, I'll see it through, and for anything that I've done in my life. But I've always been interested in archaeology. My main focus, to say, back in my uni days, was paleontology. And I guess I've just moved up the animal kingdom a little bit. I'm now just focusing on humans. I do actually remember when I was about 21, 22, and I was just leaving Manchester University, my first degree, and someone asked me, what are you going to do? This is before I joined the oil company. And I remember telling them, I'm going to write books on evolution. It's taken a while, but I have actually started a book on evolution. And I actually started the book when I started the course. Humans and Gods, A Race to the End. That's the title.
Wow.
I've done a ridiculous amount of words that I've gone off at a tangent, so a lot of them are going to be cut out.
And evolution is actually highly tied up with archaeology. There's even a branch called evolutionary archaeology.
Well, I mean, last term I did the human evolution course with Kerry Shipton, which was superb. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It was the right decision. I'm always picking out stuff from the past. At dinners I'll come up with something. So I don't think it's been a surprise to many people. It allows me, if I'm going to write a book as well, that's probably the big pull for me. I wanted to write this book, a serious book. I can't just write it as a layman. I've got to get in there, and I've got to sort of really understand what's going on. And I've got to get a good degree. I mean, that's the other thing I've given myself a time. I've got to get a first, I'm on for a first. At the moment, I took Greek art and architecture last term, and I must admit, I did think the second week I thought, "Oh, what have I done? I don't understand what's going on." And I'm gonna lower this, this mark, but I managed to get a high 70 in the exam. So somehow I put the effort in, you get the result at the end.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know. In the UK, first honors is kind of like the equivalent of an A. In America, 70 is it. 70 in the US would be a C, but here that's kind of what we would call an A.
Yes.
And you need that actually if you're going on to a PhD, which is something that I found.
Yeah.
So yes, after coming back after so long, coming back to school, it's definitely an adventure. Now, Greek art, that reminded me, because I took a class on the Bronze Age Aegean last year, so that's Bronze Age Greece. Of course I'm interested kind of in everything, but Greece, antiquity was never something I was super interested in particular, but something that really changed that was before the course. I thought, what am I doing for this Christmas, New Year break? Greece is warm. Let me go there. Yeah. And I went and I visited all of the locations that we were basically studying. And that made the class then super interesting. So I know you're always traveling, and we see that a lot. Did travel have anything to do with your interest in archaeology?
I probably use it as an excuse to go away a lot.
Got it.
I mean, for example, just before the Greek art and architecture exam, I thought I'd better go to Athens Archaeological Museum just to check out a few vases.
Yep.
Funny enough, actually, when I got there, I was told that it was shut. So I went to see these vases, and the whole room
was it shut?
For the Attic black figure and Attic red figure vase was shut. They're doing some work.
Oh yes, I was there not so long ago. They are doing a slow roll renovation.
So what I did though, I took out my UCL Archaeology ID card and showed it them and explained to them I'm doing this big project on attic vases and the depiction of Athenian women on them, and I managed to get them to open up the rooms.
Brilliant.
They said you got 30 minutes, so I had my mobile phone. I literally went round as fast as I could and took pictures of everything I needed to take.
That's the story behind those pictures. I hope while you were there you checked out the Antikythera mechanism.
I did.
Yes.
Oh wow! I mean, that's just phenomenal. Of course, it's just been recently shown on the what's his name, Indiana Jones,
yes.
the one when he jumped the shark. I mean,
yes.
It's a little bit too far fetched, I think.
Yeah,
but no, I mean, what a find. I mean, how the mindset to just to understand what they've done before the Bible was written, the Christian Bible. It just makes you think, well, we really underestimate people.
And I don't know if you knew this. I'm doing a series called Archaeology Porn, and this was number 1.
What's it?
The Antikythera mechanism. Now, when it was found, of course, it was all encrusted, right? And they saw like the wheels or some of the gears sticking out. And they said, "Oh, that's just something that was dropped. That's not old. That fell off of a ship."
Correct. Yeah.
That kind of wheel.
And then they thought it was a clock.
Yes, and that kind of technology didn't come about again until like the Middle Ages or something, early modern period.
They would use it to work out when the Olympics were going to be played. They worked out the whole solar system. They worked out the tides through this mechanism that they created. It's quite phenomenal. Yeah, it's quite phenomenal.
Now, another interesting thing you brought up was your background, having just sold a business. Believe it or not, our first interview in the series, same situation. Someone cashed out. Me, I'm not quite in that situation, but let's put it this way, I don't need to worry about wherever the next meal is coming from. Sure. So what do you think about archaeology in terms of like career and job, both in general, and what do you think you're going to do with it?
I think it's ripe for an entrepreneur to come in and work in the field of AI and actually pull together AD&A. I mean, there haven't been many entrepreneurs. I think, we are, as a group, we go out and we're curious, we want to identify and learn. But I think there's so much more that you can do with that learning. In terms of turning it into businesses that will help people and help the world. And I think we're at that stage now. I genuinely believe we've come into archaeology at a time like no other. I think it's going to be, I remember we were having these discussions in some of our earlier lectures where, I was a little bit surprised, in fact, was how little science was involved in the early days and how art was, sort of a big player in archaeology. It's called an ology. I thought it's going to be more science. And of course, then when we started looking, after the war, when radiocarbon dating came in, and obviously the machinery to help us dig better came in. That's much more scientific, much more technology. But I think we're here now on a tipping point where we have at our hands AI, and we also have where we are at the moment with ancient DNA and understanding not only the human genome, the Neanderthal genome, but we can understand so much in terms of our background and use that to plot a path forward in all sorts of ways, in medicine, in climate change, etc., etc.
Yeah, and we're located just a few blocks away from the Francis Crick Institute, where in the UK a lot of that AD&A studies is going on. My particular area is early medieval, and I think from even now they're now up to thousands of DNA sequences that they've done from that period alone in this country. So when you're talking about numbers like that, that is where AI can become more powerful.
Well, I mean, humans can only do so much, and we've got to use this AI as a tool to manage the sort of the phenomenal amounts of data. And it's not just data, I believe, that we know we ought to incorporate. It's data that we have, and we should just throw it in. Because sometimes, you'll find something that you actually weren't looking for through from other data. Data is going to become so important in all sorts of ways. But I think that, that looking backwards and looking at, what's happened can help us move forward and look at how we need to plot a path forwards.
Yeah, and something that's interesting about archaeology is science has become so much to the fore. If you read popular media about archaeology, I find that most things now have a heavy scientific angle.
They do.
But the funny thing is when you actually go out into the fields, which is what originally brought me into archaeology, there's a really big difference. So when you're out on the field, it looks like if you see old pictures of Pitt Rivers or Mortimer Wheeler, it doesn't look that different. But then they're doing all kinds of stuff with it that blows your mind. AD&A, isotopic studies.
Absolutely. What you can find from a tooth, one single tooth that may be from a Neanderthal, sort of 50, 60, 70,000 years ago or more, 200,000 years ago, we can work out where it ate, what it ate. Well, it's just it is mind blowing. And again, some of in fact, there's so much going on at the moment in archaeology. I mean, there was supposed to be just before Christmas. There's supposed to be an announcement of from Israel Finkelstein and David Reich, who manages the AD&A, his own laboratory, which is phenomenal. He's written a fantastic book. I don't know if you've read that book, David Reich's book, but I mean, it's well worth looking at if you're interested in AD&A. But it's supposed to be obviously with the 7th October issue and what's gone on, they didn't announce it, but I mean that was going to be looking at sort of I think it was about 10 individuals they found in a tomb near Israel, and they sort of looked at, and there's strong connection to the Canaanites, so it's kind of proved what I guess probably what I put in my essay that Israelis came from the Canaanites. So it's all of that sort of stuff which is you stories and understanding of where you go, and then from that you can learn so much. And even yesterday, as you probably saw on the news, there's there was a recent find where they've looked at the Namyaya tracking, which was to understand things like multiple sclerosis and even Alzheimer's.
They found the origin of MS, and then last year they actually found, and I think it was through DNA, the original origin of the plague. Which was in a village in, I think, present-day Kyrgyzstan.
Interesting.
So, it's mind-blowing what you can do. Now, you're also, I know, taking a course in something that is very heavily scientific as well, which is archaeobotany. Oh, yeah. Now, as I do try to communicate archaeology, it's a niche topic to begin with, but within it there's a million niches. And when I first thought of archaeobotany, I thought of what's in your mind is sort of fossils, and then you have to remember that's paleontology.
Yes.
Some of the most confused disciplines with archaeology are geology, paleontology. You've already done those. So tell me about archaeobotany.
Well, archaeobotany is looking at really small stuff. Macro archaeobotany is effectively looking at things you can probably just make out with a naked eye. That's macro. Micro, you haven't got a bloody clue. But it's been used for so many important areas. Take the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse is a real. Going back to climate control in the climate crisis, as where we are at the moment. We need to look at archaeology to see what happened previously. We know that the temperature's always been up and down. There is a different reason now. We know that through science. But how did we manage? What happened? And the Bronze Age collapse. A big part of it was down to the climate. And we can identify even in Lake Galilee, Lake Kinneret, should I say, Sea of Galilee, isn't it? Where we can drill down and we can see certain pollens from certain plants changed at a particular time. There were the olive trees, there were the grapes, and all of a sudden they were gone.
Yep. And in Scotland, not known for its sunny weather, they used to grow grapes for wine cultivation. Yeah,
there was, the things have changed. There are lions in Europe, there were hyenas in Europe. The world's moved on, and we've kind of rotated a little bit as well. A bit of geology there, but no, I find it's very, very close to forensic science, I guess. Archaeobotany. You're using sort of microscopes to work out, what could have happened, what did happen. Listen, I've only had one lecture, so it's early days on that one, but very exciting. But going back to DNA, and I do feel that it's going to come to the fore more and more and more. We see it sometimes, and recently, and for the bad. There was a case in 2019. I remember They found Philistines had come from, I believe Crete. They worked out that there'd been some sort of, maybe the sea people were connected. We've done some of that work, haven't we? And I think 3 or 4 days later, Netanyahu jumped on it, completely got the whole thing wrong, and said this proves that Palestinians aren't from, And of course, all it did was just create a load of political rubbish.
Yes, especially because that's historically illiterate by itself. Yeah,
correct. And you ended up with, Palestinians saying, so Ashkenazis don't have any DNA from Israel. And it's nonsense. It's all about looking at differences, and really where we should be looking at is the similarities. I've recently done mine, and I have DNA and relatives that I know. I have loads of Sephardic, loads of Ashkenazi, loads of Mizrahi, some Palestinians, some Sicilians, some Canadians, all around the world.
Yep.
That we're all one species. We're very, very unusual in the point that since the Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, everybody else has gone. Homo sapiens, it's us. We're the only. How many other genuses only have one species?
Yeah, not many.
I think there's a tree called the ginkgo.
Yep.
And the ginkgo tree, I think they call it a living reptile. Effectively, we are a living reptile. You could argue we're the most successful species in the world, what we've done, but you could also argue we're probably the most unsuccessful. We've done the best job at sort of messing up the world and raping it, but we're at a point where we're not going to be around for that long. Neanderthals were around for 500, 600, 700,000
something
years.
like that. Yeah,
we've only been around for modern humans 200, 180, 200, something like that. So I don't think we're going to make. I don't think we're going to beat Neanderthal record even. And then you look at things like sharks in the sea, and they've been around for
crocodiles.
Crocodiles, absolutely. Yeah.
Horseshoe crabs. Yeah. Yep.
There we go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, with when what was interesting is you brought up how similar we all are, and when you look backwards, that's something that I found really interesting in sort of paleoarchaeology and really prehistoric times.
Yeah.
You look around the world, it's kind of crazy how similar human life looked, and what hunting, gathering, and the early the beginnings of agriculture. Have you studied anything in that era?
Recently I did the human evolution archaeology course, and I think what was very interesting is when we were a genus with more than one species, I think we sit here and we think Homo sapiens are the ones with the cognitive ability, and we've developed such in such a way, but Neanderthals, they buried their dead. They would bury their dead sometimes with tools. Something's happening in the afterlife. Probably they had this forethought. They knew, and I think that's where we've come from people who for some reason haven't quite made it. Maybe we were nastier. Maybe we we mated with them because we've all got Neanderthal in us.
Yes.
I've got, I think, worked out I think it's up to 4%, isn't it? I think I've worked mine out 2.4%. It came back as Neanderthal. So we know that there was some of that. But for some reason, and it could well be, of course, for reasons of disease, and that we were able to have something. And again, looking at what they found out yesterday, or should I say was announced yesterday, there were benefits to having MS. There were benefits to having Alzheimer's. Of course, people weren't living more than 40.
Yeah.
So they never actually got the Alzheimer's we have, but there would have been some benefits for diseases that were around as they travelled the European plains.
And that's what people often misunderstand about evolution, very basic misunderstanding. Evolution is not about surviving a long time, it's about surviving to breed. So all of this age we live in, where people are living till 80 and 90 and 100, that's sort of out of the realm of evolution.
Correct.
So and you reminded me about the contributions of earlier hominids. There was a story, I believe, published last year that the very first carpenter was discovered, or at least that has been discovered. It was in Zambia, tens and tens of thousands of years old. It was actually like a carpentry sort of station. It looked like a workbench with tools there, and that was well before it could have been a Homo sapien.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even a Neanderthal. I forget which Homo it was, but Yeah.
Heidelbergensis, or there's all sorts of...
Yeah, there's I think some 20 of them, something like that. Not my area of expertise, but it just blows your mind.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Now, I think you've talked a lot about what interests you about archaeology. What do you think the importance of archaeology is for the larger public? I mean, one thing people don't like to always admit it is just kind of a nerdy hobby, but it is a lot more than that. And people have a different answer to that question. What more than that is it? What is that to you?
I think I take your point, and I think certainly it has been to a degree, with almost fictional characters being their sort of relationship with archaeology. But I think that's going to change. I genuinely do. I think that we're at that sort of point, as I said earlier, where I think what we've done well to date is use science. We've talked about dentition, how you can understand, work out migration and ADNA. But I think the one thing we haven't touched really is going to be is AI. And I know we're not alone in that, but I think the importance of what we will find from it will be headlines. Even last week, as I say, I think, archaeology probably popped up through it because it does. Now you're doing it. I mean, before I was doing it, I probably wasn't counting. But now I'm doing it. Every time it pops up on the news, archaeology,
Yep.
Archaeology. And, more and more I'm posting stuff on Facebook because it's in the Guardian or it's in the Times, etc. And I said, nice clip, or BBC, and, you just repost it. So I do think we're going to see things that I don't know I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know the subject matter, but I know it will benefit the human race. And I do think there has to be some sort of turning point soon with issues in the world that we face in the population. I mean, was it 18? I think someone 1845 we reached 1 billion on this planet. 1840. That is a blink of an eye since humans are around. 1845, and now we're at 8 billion.
Yeah.
Something's got to give, and we don't really know how to manage it, and it's a very difficult subject. Because we've always had migration, from an interest of understanding human evolution. But we need to understand and do something soon, I think, with our planet. Or understand. I mean, I know Elon Musk has sort of come up with some crazy ideas, and sometimes people don't want to talk about it because it sort of it becomes in sort of areas that this is a bit sort of hot around the collar. I don't really want to, but this is what we're facing.
Yeah, and you talked about the Bronze Age collapse before. That was a period of time where multiple civilizations, the Hittites, the Egyptians, right in the
knock-on was incredible.
Yeah, in the Aegean world, all sort of collapsed simultaneously. There was a group of people called the Sea People. No one really knows too much about them. There's some thought they might have been the Phoenicians, but nobody really knows. But one thing that was clear,
we know they brought different pigs to Israel than the pigs that are in Israel already.
And nowadays,
I remember reading a paper on that.
And nowadays, pig is not really a very popular food in Israel for any population. So.
No, it's not. It's not. You're right. Yeah.
So, in any event, one thing that did come out of that, though, is there definitely were a lot of ecological problems at that time.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm probably simplifying things, but if you imagine a country where they provided wheat and farming products, and they would sell those to get copper or bronze to make swords or tools or whatever it is, but if the climate was such that they couldn't harvest, they've got nothing to sell. So the country there that's selling the copper and the bronze, they can't sell it to them, so they go bust. And it literally, it was a knock-on effect. There's so many other things that came into the mix, but in simple terms, that can happen, and that's climate, and we got to learn from that clearly.
And you can imagine, if you study trade in that time, how disruptive it must have been. There is that shipwreck, I think it's called Ulu Barun, but there's others. But what that revealed was how complex the trade networks were in that time.
Incredibly.
And that's something that I think came to the fore during COVID. We're talking about the relevance of archaeology, which is we have such a specialized supply chain now. Yeah. When there are problems and the one place that produces whatever can't do that, let's say a rare mineral, what does that go into? It goes into medicines, it goes into cell phones.
We saw it with cars, didn't we, with the chips that we couldn't get hold of and things like that. It's slightly parallel, but it's the same consequence.
So there's definitely a relevance you see in the past. Thousands and thousands of years ago, we faced a similar issue today.
Yeah.
So, and then of course talking about the origins of
And that's just sort of, I should just say, and that's just humans, but we can also look at other genus and species and what happened when they were faced with certain, forces, should I say. So, we can learn from them. It's not just us, but, we the hominins have had a sort of a very short but bumpy ride already, and we're sitting at that crest of a wave, and we don't know where it's going. So we've got the only thing we I think we can use AI using data from the past to predict future, and I think that a lot of focus needs to be on that. But what other data is there to understand where we're going?
Yep, only the past.
Yeah.
And that one of the things that I think actually being old enough to have seen like the internet come about and then develop, there's so much power in that, so much power in data, but then you see what it's actually being used for. It's mostly entertainment, right? Or other even more nefarious things.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I'm probably going back to one of your earlier questions, but as you get older, I guess you do just naturally get a little bit wiser because of experience. And I think one thing that's certainly clear in my mind is, we're not here for that long. We've got to do something to make our market, and not just sit and play games and do nothing, because it's a waste.
Yeah.
And the more I can sort of recommend that, certainly to my children, to other people, the better.
Yep.
I think things are changing. I mean, I've seen little things. My children, friends, girlfriends, children, they work really hard for their degree. My first degree, I was terrible. I was out playing football. I was drinking. I was partying. I was going off with girls. I didn't do much. That's why I've got to get first this time.
Yep.
I'm so focused on it. And there's a great thrill and achievement when you hand something in and you get something back. But not just that, not just sort of pay, but the learning and the understanding you get from it, and how you can apply that to other thought processes.
And definitely at UCL, to have some of the leaders in our fields, it's really something.
Absolutely.
And to tell them telling you did a good job. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe a lighter subject. What would you say is, if you could pick one or a couple of the most amazing archaeological sites you've ever been to?
I'm more interested in artifacts than the actual sites, but just staying on sites. There's something magical. When I was 21, 22, I went to Israel and I walked up Masada in the morning.
Oh, yes, yeah. I've been there.
Okay, it's a bit too late for me. I prefer earlier stuff. I think it was at 70 something.
It was around
the Common Era, wasn't it? It was, yeah. But the sight of it and the knowledge of what happened, I know the sort of suicide myth's been debunked now, but the fact that you wake up and you climb this hill and the view, the Dead Sea and all around, and the fact that the Jewish people were able to sort of pull up water, and they create an incredible system to maintain life for so long. But then the Romans, worked out how this incredible ramp mechanism that they did to climb it. Because have you been there yourself?
Yes.
How do you attack it? It's incredible.
Well, so for people who don't know, Masada is a place in Israel where they were holdouts in the Roman. They were uprising. They had an uprising against the Romans. They were one of the last holdouts. They survived up on top of this. In America, we would call that a mesa. I don't know if there's a better word for it, but sort of this platform. Right. And they had a whole community up there, and they had collected water. They had agriculture. Yeah. So even though they were under siege, they were just fine. They could wait out the Romans. Yeah. And now the traditional story was when the Romans built this ramp, were able to breach the walls, the people there committed suicide en masse. So talk a little bit about the debate about that. And
yeah, I think it's just one of those ones when you actually sort of look at it and try and understand it. How on earth did all those people do that at in the same time? It's almost impossible. It may well have been that some did, but it would have been a few. And I think because of the time spent trying to sort of, the Romans would have been pretty pissed off because they were sort of,
it was like decades.
Camped out for, no, I don't think it was that long, but they camped out for a long time, yeah. And to finally, I think it was just a massacre. unfortunately. But yeah, we go back in time and happens time and time again.
Got it. And now, just because you come from such a different background, what did your friends and family say when you told them this is what you were going to do?
I don't think my kids were that surprised. Funnily enough, my daughter's at Manchester doing her PPE at the moment. She graduates this summer. My son did a tour around the world, but he went back to university and he's doing a PGCE, an education degree. He graduates this summer. And I graduate this summer.
Wow,
so
big family graduation.
The three of us, that's going to be pretty good. So yeah, I don't think because they know me quite well. And I think my closest friends, there's no surprise, ex-girlfriend, etc. I don't think they were surprised. But yeah, some people thought, what on earth are you doing? In fact, even my sister's one of them, funny enough, because she hated school. She hates exams. And the thought, I mean, she has sort of nightmares, I think, of going back to school and having to sit exams. I must admit, I absolutely love it. That thought process of, the challenge that you face. I love challenges, sort of.
Well, I've only had one exam. I think there's a lot fewer of those because of COVID, although I think they're coming back because with AI you can have...
Well, essays are harder.
Yeah, well...
You've really got to put the time in for them, haven't you?
But I enjoy essays, whereas I don't enjoy test taking. But it was something I used to be very good at. But I still... So there's one of those sort of Freudian dreams, that you can have, the one about showing up naked or whatever. The one that I still have, I always had it when I was a kid, and I still have it to this day, is that I had a final exam. I forgot about it. Then it's like the day before, and I suddenly remember. It hasn't yet happened here, but so it's encouraging to hear you've done well on your exams.
Absolutely, yeah. I've still got the essay to do though.
Yep. How many more do you have?
I've handed in my human evolution essay, so that one's done. I'm quite happy with that one, and I've got the Greek art and architecture, where I'm talking about Athenian women, brides and wives, prostitutes, and hetari, which is a term I wasn't aware of before, but I am fully aware of now. Almost like a courtesan, a very high class.
Got it.
They seem to have the best life of all the women, actually.
Yeah, and that's a very common portrayal in that time.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, for me, I take my vacation very seriously. So I finished all the papers before the break, and now it's a fresh new start thinking about the dissertation. And anyway, so for people getting into archaeology, just to wrap up, let's say actually people like ourselves, mature people who are sort of at a point in their life where they want to do something different, and this is something they've been interested in or a shiny new thing. What advice do you have for them?
I would tell them to go to room 55 of the British Museum and take a look at Ashburnipal's library. It was 30,000 clay tablets back in, I think it was something like sort of 650 BCE.
That was Babylon, right?
Babylon, that's right, yeah, Nineveh. It's just phenomenal. It is absolutely, I mean, okay, you won't be able to read them, but someone's deciphered them. We've had the Rosetta Stone. That's an interesting fact. If we never found the Rosetta Stone or the other similar stones that have since been found, AI would have done it for us, of course. But anyway, we did find Rosetta Stone, so we could see it. But it's just quite phenomenal what we knew. I think people, I'm constantly surprised at, you mentioned the... you can probably pronounce it better than I can, that was found underwater.
The Antitheric.
The Antitheric, yeah, exactly. We've been working on medicine, we've been working on the solar system for thousands of years, and we're looking at things, and certainly in his library there'd have been the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written, 120, 140, 1,200 or 1,400 years before the Hebrew Bible was written.
Yep.
So what's that? I mean, how many generations? Hundreds. That's going to be a minimum of 24 generations if they lasted 50. They wouldn't. So it's going to be more than that. Yeah. So you could argue, say, 30 generations before there was this story about Noah's flood.
Yep.
Or it wasn't Noah's flood back then, but, it was a flood and it was the same story. These are things that they're sort of mind-blowing, and you try and get your head around them, and you look at mathematics is something, a science which... hasn't really changed. Well, it hasn't changed. There's so many other things have changed, but mathematics is mathematics. Numbers are numbers.
Yep.
And, we understood them way back.
Yep.
So yeah, something. I think it's something, a little something that you go in and it just blows your mind, and that can get you hooked.
Yeah, go
I
and
think
get
Tutankhamun did that for lots of people
Yep.
way back. I think it was in the 70s, wasn't it? Howard
Well-
Carter. Well, when it came to the UK, we had it at the British Museum, didn't we?
Yeah, and Tutankhamun, that's actually what my mom, she's not in archaeology, but it was always a pet interest of hers, which is probably, maybe that infected me a little bit. She saw that when it came to the U.S., and back in the day, if you read A Catcher in the Rye,
Yeah,
you
Salinger.
you used to be able to go into the Metropolitan Museum, and she and her sisters used to play hide and go seek in the coffins and the sarcophagus.
Really?
Yes, and that's what got her interested. Now, museums usually aren't that fun nowadays, but go into a museum and get inspired. After this, I'll have to ask you about Manchester, because I'm going there for the first time
Okay.
in a month or something. So, all right, thanks a lot, Michael. It was great talking, and
You're very welcome.
see you around at the Institute.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.